Hello, and welcome to The Brief Insight, your go to podcast for breaking down the latest trends, research, and policies shaping our world. Whether you're passionate about sustainability, global economics, or emerging innovations, this is where we simplify complex ideas to keep you informed and inspired. If you enjoy what you hear, don't forget to like this episode, subscribe to our channel, and share it with anyone looking for insights that matter. We're here every Monday and Friday, so hit that notification bell to stay updated. Your support helps us grow and continue bringing you sharp, relevant content that sparks conversation. Thank you for tuning into The Brief Insight. Now let's dive into today's topic.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Today we are diving deep into the legal battles surrounding gender-affirming care for minors.
Specifically in Tennessee and Kentucky.
Right.
Yeah, it's a very complex issue with very high stakes for everyone involved.
Yeah, for sure.
We'll be looking at court decisions, legal analyses, and even personal testimonies from families who are caught in the middle of these legal fights.
The goal here is to help you cut through the legal jargon and understand what's really at stake.
Absolutely.
We're talking parental rights, medical ethics, changing social norms, a lot to unpack.
A lot on the table.
So let's jump in.
Let's get into it.
First up, what exactly do these Tennessee and Kentucky laws actually prohibit?
So, Tennessee's law bans puberty blockers and hormone therapy for any minors seeking gender-affirming care.
Wow. Okay.
Kentucky's law is a little bit different, but it effectively bans any medical procedure, including surgeries that aim to change a minor's appearance to align with their gender identity.
I'm guessing those little differences in the wording are going to be important when these cases are argued in court.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Legal experts are already arguing that both laws violate the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment because they single out transgender youth.
Gotcha.
They also argue that these laws violate parents' fundamental right to make medical decisions for their children, which is protected by the Due Process Clause.
Okay, so these laws are being challenged.
Yes.
Have they gone to court yet?
Absolutely. And they've been going back and forth between district courts and the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals.
Okay.
The decisions so far really highlight how divided the country is on this topic.
Yeah.
In both Tennessee and Kentucky, the district courts initially blocked the laws with preliminary injunctions, saying they were likely unconstitutional.
Interesting.
But then the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals overturned those injunctions.
So for now, the Sixth Circuit is siding with the states.
For now, yes.
Okay.
But it was a split decision. One judge dissented and argued that these laws likely violate equal protection.
Gotcha.
The back and forth between the majority and the dissenting opinions gets at the heart of what's being debated here.
Okay, let's unpack some of those disagreements.
Yeah, let's get into it.
What were some of the key points of contention between the judges?
Well, one of the biggest disagreements was about the level of scrutiny that the court should apply when looking at these cases.
Okay.
The majority used a rational basis review, which means they only needed to determine if the law was rationally related to a legitimate government interest.
Gotcha.
The dissenting judge argued for intermediate scrutiny, which is a much tougher standard, and it requires the government to prove that the law is substantially related to an important government interest.
So basically, they couldn't agree on how closely to examine these laws.
Exactly. And that all boils down to whether the court sees these laws as targeting a protected class, which would then require that higher level of scrutiny.
Right.
The dissenting judge argued that these laws inherently disadvantage one sex over another, meaning they should face more rigorous examination.
That makes sense. Were there any other key disagreements?
Another big one was about the scope of parental rights.
Okay.
The majority basically said that a parent's right to make medical decisions for their child doesn't extend to new or controversial treatments.
Oh, wow.
Even if they believe it's in their child's best interest.
So even if the parents and the doctors agree,
Yeah,
that seems like a huge point of contention.
it is.
It sounds like this boils down to whether parents have the ultimate say in their child health care, especially when it comes to newer treatments.
Absolutely. And that's a debate that's going to continue to play out in courts across the country.
Yeah, I bet.
But to really grasp what's at stake here,
Yeah.
we need to shift gears a little bit and hear directly from those most affected by these laws.
Okay, I'm ready.
All right.
Let's hear from LW, John Doe, and Ryan Rowe.
Okay, so these are three transgender minors from Tennessee who bravely shared their stories in declarations that were included in the court filings.
Wow, okay.
LW, a 15-year-old transgender girl, talked about her deep fear of developing male secondary sex characteristics and how hormone therapy completely alleviated her distress.
It's incredible how, in just a few sentences, she captures what's at stake for so many transgender youth.
Yeah.
It's about aligning your physical self with your internal sense of who you are.
Right.
And for John Doe, a 12-year-old transgender boy, the distress started even earlier.
Yeah, he knew he was a boy from a very young age.
Wow.
And was incredibly uncomfortable being forced to participate in activities meant for girls.
Oh, I see.
Puberty blockers have given him the space to live more authentically as himself.
I love that.
Hmm.
And then there's Ryan Rowe.
Yeah.
His story is the one that really stayed with me.
Ryan's story is incredibly powerful. He struggled for years with anxieties about his voice.
Yeah.
It was testosterone therapy that finally helped him feel comfortable with his body. He was able to participate in class and express himself without that constant fear of being misgendered.
Each of their stories is such a powerful illustration of the emotional and social toll of being denied access to gender-affirming care.
Right.
And it's not just the kids who are impacted, right?
Absolutely not. Their parents also shared their perspectives in the court documents.
Okay.
They spoke about their initial hesitation, their desire to make informed decisions, the emotional toll of this legal battle, and the incredibly difficult decision of potentially uprooting their lives just to make sure their children can receive the care they need.
It's a powerful reminder that these laws don't exist in a vacuum.
No.
They have a ripple effect on entire families and communities.
Yes, they do.
It also makes you think about the impact on the doctors and nurses who care for transgender youth.
You're right. These laws put healthcare professionals in a really tough spot.
Yeah.
They have to balance their oath to care for their patients with the fear of legal consequences for providing treatments that are now banned.
Yeah, it's a tough spot to be in. So, speaking of healthcare professionals, let's talk about the medical perspective surrounding gender-affirming care.
Okay.
We've heard how transformative it can be for some individuals, but what are the arguments for and against the use of puberty blockers and hormone therapy in minors?
So those who support these treatments often point to the growing body of research suggesting they can improve mental health outcomes for transgender youth.
Okay.
They argue that these treatments can prevent the distress that can come with going through puberty when your body doesn't align with your gender identity.
So early intervention is key to preventing potential mental health issues.
Exactly. And it's also important to remember that puberty blockers are reversible.
Oh,
So if they're stopped, puberty will resume as usual.
I see.
It's not a permanent decision.
Gotcha.
Hormone therapy, on the other hand, does have more lasting effects.
Okay.
But even then, supporters emphasize that these treatments are only given after a lot of consideration,
Yeah.
counseling, and informed consent from both the patient and their parents.
Okay, so what about the arguments against these treatments?
Okay.
What concerns are opponents raising?
Well, one of the main concerns is the potential for long-term side effects.
Okay.
These include things like impacts on bone density, fertility, and brain development.
Those are definitely serious concerns that need to be carefully considered.
Absolutely. And opponents also argue that minors just aren't mature enough to understand the long-term implications of these treatments, especially if they're irreversible.
Yeah.
They question whether a teenager can truly grasp what it means to potentially impact their fertility later in life.
It's a really complex issue, especially since the science is constantly evolving and these treatments are relatively new.
Absolutely.
And to add to the complexity, we have guidelines issued by major medical organizations like the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, or WPATH-BUF,
Right.
and the Endocrine Society.
Yes.
Both have come out in support of using these treatments in minors.
Yes, they have.
I imagine those guidelines carry a lot of weight in this debate.
They're very central to the arguments on both sides.
Okay.
WPPath and the Endocrine Society emphasize that there are rigorous standards and ethical considerations involved when providing gender-affirming care to minors.
Okay.
This includes things like comprehensive assessments, mental health evaluations, and informed consent.
Gotcha. But I'm sure opponents have counter-arguments to those guidelines.
Of course, they point to the fact that the guidelines have evolved very quickly over the years and express concerns about the lack of long-term data on the effects of these treatments, especially in young people whose bodies are still developing.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And that brings us to another important aspect of this debate,
Okay.
the FDA's role.
Yes.
puberty blockers and hormone therapy are FDA approved,
Right.
but not specifically for gender dysphoria in minors.
That's right, and this is a major point of contention.
Okay.
Opponents argue that the lack of specific FDA approval for this use raises serious concerns about safety and efficacy.
I see.
They say that using these medications off-label is risky. But those who support gender-affirming care argue that off-label prescribing, using a drug for something other than its approved purpose, is actually common and accepted in medicine. They argue that the FDA's approval for other uses already demonstrates that the medications are safe.
So we have conflicting interpretations of medical guidelines.
Yes.
Debate about FDA's role
Right.
and different opinions on the potential risks and benefits of these treatments.
And it's all playing out in court.
Wow.
And it's all happening in a larger global context as well.
Okay.
Some European countries have started restricting access to gender-affirming care for minors.
Interesting.
And this is something that those who oppose these treatments in the U.S. often point to as evidence that there are growing concerns worldwide.
Okay.
But those who support gender-affirming care caution against drawing conclusions based on those policies.
Right.
They argue that cultural differences might be at play and point out that our understanding of gender dysphoria is constantly evolving. What might seem like a settled issue today could look very different in a few years.
So we've covered a lot here.
We have.
The legal arguments, the personal stories, the medical perspectives. It's clear that this issue is incredibly complex and nuanced.
It really is, and I think that's one of the big takeaways here.
Yeah.
These laws raise very complex questions about parental rights, the government's role in regulating health care, and how we protect vulnerable minors.
Yeah.
There are passionate and well-intentioned arguments on both sides,
Right.
which makes this such a difficult issue to grapple with.
And it's a conversation that will likely continue for quite some time.
Oh, absolutely.
Before we wrap up, is there anything specific you think our listeners should be thinking about as they consider all this information?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I think one thing to ponder is the long-term impact of these legal challenges.
Okay.
What kind of precedent will it set if these laws are ultimately upheld? Could it open the door for more legislation restricting healthcare access for minors, even when parents and doctors agree on a treatment plan?
That's a thought-provoking question.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if this could have implications far beyond gender-affirming care.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And beyond the legal implications.
Yeah.
Think about the ethical dilemma this creates for healthcare professionals.
Yeah, for sure.
How do they balance their responsibility to care for their patients while facing potential legal ramifications for violating these laws?
That's a tough spot.
Yeah, it really is. It puts those doctors and nurses who are trying to do what's best for their patients in a very difficult position.
Absolutely. And this is all happening while our understanding of gender identity and gender dysphoria is still evolving. We're still learning so much, and the science isn't settled.
Yeah.
So how do we make sure that laws and policies are based on the best available evidence while also recognizing the very real and immediate needs of transgender youth who are struggling right now?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it?
It is a tough question.
It is. There are no easy answers.
For sure.
But one thing we can all do is try to understand the science behind these treatments a little bit better.
Okay.
We've talked about puberty blockers and hormone therapy in somewhat abstract terms,
Right?
but it might be helpful to understand how they actually work in the body.
You know, I was just thinking that. I'm
Yeah.
glad you brought it up.
Okay.
It's easy to get lost in the legal and political debates and forget that we're talking about real medical interventions.
Right.
So let's break it down.
Okay.
How do puberty blockers work? What's actually happening in the body?
So puberty blockers, they essentially press pause on puberty.
Okay.
They work by suppressing the production of hormones like testosterone and estrogen,
Okay.
which are the hormones responsible for all those physical changes we associate with puberty, like breast development, facial hair, voice changes, all that.
So it's like hitting the pause button on all those biological changes?
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
And this can be helpful for transgender youth experiencing gender dysphoria.
Right.
It gives them time to explore their gender identity, to work with therapists, and make more informed decisions about their future care,
Okay.
without the added stress of going through physical changes that don't feel right to them.
Makes sense. It gives them a chance to figure things out without feeling rushed.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, hormone therapy works a little differently. Instead of suppressing hormones, it introduces hormones that align with a person's gender identity.
Gotcha.
So for a transgender boy, this might involve taking testosterone.
Okay.
to promote those male secondary sex characteristics.
Mm-hmm.
And for a transgender girl, it might involve taking estrogen
Okay.
to promote female characteristics.
So in a way, it's like fast-forwarding or rewinding puberty.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Okay.
And just like with puberty blockers, hormone therapy is typically only started after a lot of careful consideration, counseling, and informed consent.
So we've got the pause button with puberty blockers and the fast-forward or rewind with hormone therapy. I'm guessing these effects don't happen overnight, though.
No, they don't. The changes happen gradually.
Okay.
And the specific effects vary from person to person depending on the individual,
Mm-hmm.
the type of hormones used, and the dosage.
Okay.
It's important to understand that the goal isn't to force a particular look on someone, but rather to help them align their physical appearance with how they feel inside.
So it's about helping people feel comfortable in their own skin.
Exactly.
That's something we can all relate to.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we have a better sense of what these treatments entail.
Yes.
Now let's talk about the potential risks.
Okay.
We touched on this earlier,
Right.
but I think it's important to go into more detail,
Yes.
especially since that seems to be at the heart of the opposition's argument.
Yeah, whenever we're talking about medical interventions, especially for minors, we have to be aware of potential downsides.
Mm-hmm.
So let's discuss those.
Okay.
One of the concerns with puberty blockers is their potential impact on bone density.
So what does that mean practically?
Well, puberty is really important for bone development.
Okay.
Suppressing those hormones can potentially interfere with that process,
Right.
which could increase the risk of osteoporosis or fractures later in life.
I see. So more research is needed.
Yeah, the research on this is still ongoing.
Okay.
We don't fully understand the long-term effects.
So it sounds like being proactive and taking steps to minimize the risks is key here.
Exactly. And many doctors who provide gender-affirming care emphasize that you have to monitor bone density
Okay.
in patients taking puberty blockers
Mm-hmm.
and making sure they're getting enough calcium and vitamin D.
Right.
Now, fertility is another concern, and this one applies to both puberty blockers and hormone therapy.
Okay. What are the concerns there?
Suppressing or altering hormone production can affect a person's ability to have biological children later in life.
Right.
And this is obviously a particularly sensitive issue when talking about minors
Yeah.
who may not be thinking about starting families,
Mm-hmm.
but it's something that needs to be discussed openly with both the patient and their family.
So informed consent is crucial.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And it's also worth noting that there are options for preserving fertility, like egg or sperm freezing,
Okay.
which can be explored before starting hormone therapy.
So we've talked about bone density and fertility.
Right.
What about brain development?
That's another area where more research is needed.
Okay.
Some people worry that interfering with hormonal pathways during adolescence could have unintended consequences for brain development and cognitive function.
Are there any studies that support that?
The research is very limited, and the findings have been mixed.
Okay.
Some studies suggest there might be small differences in brain structure or activity in transgender individuals who have undergone hormone therapy,
Okay.
but it's not clear whether those differences are due to the hormones themselves or other factors.
Mm-hmm. It's hard to say what's causing those differences.
Right. It's a chicken or the egg situation.
Yeah.
And again, we need more research to figure this out.
So it seems like the bottom line with all these potential risks is that more research is needed.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment.
Okay.
And that's what makes this debate so challenging.
Mm-hmm.
We're dealing with a relatively new area of medicine,
All right.
and the science is constantly evolving.
So how do we balance the need for caution and research with the need to provide care for trans youth who are struggling right now?
It's a dilemma.
It really is.
And that's why it's so important to remember the human element in all of this.
Yes.
We can talk about statistics and hypothetical risks,
Yeah.
but we can't lose sight of the fact that these are real people whose lives are directly affected by these laws and these medical decisions.
It's easy to get lost in the legal and political arguments and forget about that.
Exactly.
These cases aren't just about gender-affirming care.
Right.
They're about a much larger conversation happening right now
Absolutely.
about individual rights, the role of government,
Yeah.
and what it means to be human.
Yes.
It feels like we're at a crossroads.
I think so too.
And the decisions we make now will have a ripple effect for years to come.
Absolutely.
So how do we navigate this uncharted territory?
Well, I think it starts with education.
Okay.
The more we understand about gender identity and gender dysphoria and the science behind these treatments,
Yeah.
the better we'll be able to have these really important conversations.
I agree. Knowledge is power.
It is.
And it's so important to approach these discussions with empathy and respect, even when we disagree.
I think it's about creating spaces where people feel comfortable sharing their experiences
Absolutely.
without fear of judgment.
It's about safety and trust.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, I think we all need to remember that we're all just human,
Yeah.
trying to navigate this world as best we can.
Okay, so we've talked about the legal battles, the emotional stories of the families involved, the medical perspectives, and even a bit of history.
We've covered a lot of ground.
I feel like I have a much better understanding of this issue now.
I'm glad to hear that it's an important conversation to be having.
It really is. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Remember, staying informed is crucial, and talking about these complex issues is how we move forward as a society.
I agree.
Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep those conversations going.